I'm Mark Caro, and welcome to episode 118 of Caropop. Our guest this week is someone who's been near the top of my Caropop want list since we launched. He's also written, played on, and sung some of my favorite songs ever. Colin Moulding of XTC. Although Andy Partridge was XTC's primary songwriter and singer, Moulding, the band's bassist, delivered their breakthrough singles and many of their best songs. The band's first two albums, White Music and Go To, were quirky, herky-jerky affairs, and Moulding's early songwriting efforts, such as Crosswires and Buzz City Talking, were in keeping with the primitive post-punk vibe. But when guitarist multi-instrumentalist Dave Gregory replaced keyboardist Barry Andrews, the band stepped up its game. So did Moulding. First came the Motown-influenced single Life Begins at the Hop, followed by his stellar contributions to the album Drums and Wires. The lead track, Making Plans for Nigel, became one of the band's signature songs. From then on, Moulding could be counted on to provide 2 to 5 songs on each XTC album, many of them standouts. They include Generals and Majors from Black Sea, Runaways and Ball and Chain, the first 2 songs on English Settlement, and Wonderland, a dreamy tune from Mummer that ushered in the band's pastoral phase. In XTC's pseudonymous psychedelic side project, the Dukes of Stratosphear, Moulding stirred up full-on It's All Too Much style trippiness with What in the World, and delivered the catchiest pop song that the Hollies never recorded, Vanishing Girl. In this episode, the first of a 2-part conversation conducted from his home in the Swindon, England area, Moulding reflects on his beginnings as a bass player and his unbusy approach to the instrument. He discusses the evolution of his songwriting, the inspiration of a certain American new wave band on XTC's early attack, the impact of Dave Gregory's arrival in the band, and the influence of producers and engineers such as Steve Lillywhite, Hugh Padgham, and David Lord. He also tells whether he sensed resentment from others over his having written several of XTC's early hits. He shares how he dealt with the end of XTC's live performances when Partridge suffered a nervous breakdown in Los Angeles during the English Settlement tour. Did Moulding like touring and playing live to begin with? Moulding also describes the jaw-dropping moment when Terry Chambers walked out on the band. Then there was the time David Gilmour asked Moulding to replace Roger Waters in Pink Floyd. Dave Gregory and Terry Chambers have been previous terrific guests on Caropop, and Moulding raises the bar further. We're 3/4 of the way through getting all of XTC on Caropop, and I'm stupidly happy about it. Please enjoy part 1 of this Caropop conversation with Colin Moulding. I remember you guys doing King for a Day on the David Letterman show. Yeah, I think it was the 3 of you, and then playing with the Paul Schaefer band, so they sort of augmented you on that.
Yeah, they filled in because obviously it was only 3 of us, and what with overdubs on the record. So yeah, they fleshed it out.
Was that fun for you, by the way? Playing some live gigs after not really, obviously you weren't doing the big on stage concerts at that point.
It was a bit nervy. We'd had chance to rehearse in the day, so that wasn't too bad. We got through it. We weren't a touring band then, so it was obviously going to be a bit edgy, but I think we got away with it.
Sure. No, it sounded great. It was exciting to hear it. And it was an interesting time for XTC too, because it was kind of the second rise. You had like your sort of first rise with, Drums and Wires, Black Sea, English Settlement, and then this one was Skylarking, Oranges and Lemons, getting a lot of radio play again. So it sort of seemed like the second bite of the apple in a way.
Yeah, it was kind of the second wave of XTC when we began to have a career in America, really. So that was exciting. The English had largely forsaken us, I think. After 82, the hits kind of dried up in the UK.
Huh.
And, I think we were looking to America to see if we could make some sort of headway,
Why do you think that is? It certainly wasn't that you were less of a British band at that point.
Well, they were always looking for the hit. We were signed to Virgin, and we hadn't had a hit. We went 2 albums, really, that didn't sell all that well. The record company said, well, you could see they were getting a bit edgy with our career, the way our career was going. I think, I don't know, maybe they were going to drop us if we hadn't, if we didn't make some sort of progress. Yeah, so enter Todd Rundgren in the picture.
Right, exactly. Well, so to back you up, what did you do first? Did you start learning bass or writing songs?
Well, just learning bass. I came across this bass player called Andy Fraser, who played for a band called Free.
Right.
I was very enamored with the way his bass sounded. It wasn't particularly bassy. It was more sort of borpy, if I could say an onomatopoeic name, And I liked the band because I thought they were, for a three-piece, essentially they were a three-piece with a singer, that they had a certain kind of emptiness in their arrangements that they got together, and the bass was integral to that. There were certain sequences where the bass didn't play at all, and I thought, oh, well, that's novel. You take All Right Now, which I suppose is their biggest hit. The bass doesn't even play in the verses, And I was really taken with that. And I thought, do you know what? I'd really like to do that, So that set me on the path. And I bought myself a bass guitar and began donking away at it,
Yeah, there are a lot of bass players who will be like, "Oh, I love John Entwistle on The Real Me because it's so busy and you get to do so much stuff." And for you, you're hearing the space between the notes.
Yeah, I've always thought less is more, I think, generally. And here was a bass player who I really thought, that's how I want to be. I want to play as least as possible. And I just think when you do come in, it makes so much more of an impact, That was what I felt.
So would you like sort of play along with the Free records and just kind of play those bass parts? And is that how you learned?
Yeah, there were other bands around at the time. Riffs were very big at the time. Early 70s, I'm talking about, 70, 71. Guitar riffs and bass riffs, they were quite big. And I remember you had Deep Purple in rock. That album had lots of riffs on, and I used to play along to those. And it gave you a feeling of accomplishment if you could play those riffs, And playing along to records was a big part of becoming a bass player, I think,
And at some point, did you teach yourself guitar as well?
Yeah, that sort of came a bit later with chords and stuff. But, I started off on the bass. That was how I started, and gradually moved to other instruments after that. But, it was the bass, really, to begin with.
Do you remember the first song you ever wrote?
Oh, Lord. Probably the ones on White Music. That's why they're not very good.
So the first time you wrote a song was when it was like, oh, we're in a band, I should write a song, as opposed to, sitting in your bedroom and thinking, some girl broke your heart or something like that.
No, Andy was the principal writer in the band, or the only writer. And I think it was one of the roadies said, Colin, you ought to write. Otherwise you'll miss out, And I said, oh. And we just signed a contract, to write songs and record. And I thought, well, I'll give it a go. But most of my rotten ones were written in the public eye. So that's one of the things George Harrison says, that Lennon and McCartney could perfect their art before they got a recording contract, whereas George had to expose everyone to his early efforts, So
right.
I have an affinity with George and the way his writing career had progressed, And it's hard when you're writing songs and they're not all that good, but they're being exposed to the public forever,
Huh.
That's a hard thing. You really want to perfect what you're doing before they ever reach the public,
Well, it seems with you that there's a point where everything clicks. You've got, the first two albums, and you've got songs like Crosswires and I Am the Audience, and just these songs on the first two XTC albums that are like all right, but those two albums also are just kind of these sort of herky-jerky things. And then all of a sudden, I think it probably would have been the single Life Begins at the Hop.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, that's like this really great tuneful song. And then you have Drums and Wires with, Making Plans for Nigel and 10 Feet Tall and Day in, Day Out. And That's the Way. And all of a sudden, it just seems like there was this quantum leap in songwriting from you. And I'm wondering if you specifically said, okay, I'm just taking a different approach to this, or whether you just sort of figured it all out.
Yeah, it was a different approach. For the first two records, we had this thing about discordancy, I think. And, we've got to be different. We've got to make a splash. We've got to be different. So we've got to play these weird chords with discords in them, and Devil's Harmony and stuff like that. And I think Crosswires is the Devil's Harmony. And for a while I got into that, and I got swept along with it. And I thought, after a couple of albums, I thought, you know what, this isn't really me. I'm a melodic guy, And when Barry left, it seemed to kind of flick a switch. I thought, well, I need to be myself. What am I doing? Discordancy is not really me. So I made a conscious effort to kind of be more myself. And as soon as I started that, I had a hit.
Right.
So that was a big surprise. So, yeah, I made a conscious effort to be me, I think.
So was Life Begins at the Hop that breakthrough song?
Yeah, and Nigel, they were pretty much done within weeks of each other. But, of course, Nigel was done in the album sessions. And
right.
They'd chosen Hop, which was slightly out of the album sessions to begin with. So that got released first. But I think had it been in with the album session, then I think probably Nigel would have been chosen as the first single, But yeah, I began shooting from the hip, I start firing off ideas that were a little strange. I'd had failures, and I wasn't too worried about failure. And I think when you don't fear failure, there's always a chance that you're going to come up with something really good, because you're just shooting from the hip and firing it off, and without too much consideration. And I think when you don't know what you're doing, good things happen,
Right. Well, it's interesting because you came up, listening to Free and Jethro Tull and those bands. Yeah. And Andy obviously has this, major affinity for the Beatles and 60s psychedelic bands. And but you came out of the punk scene, and so there's this very quote unquote quirky energy to you, and like a lot of fast songs and herky-jerky rhythms and everything. And it seems like you sort of were swept along with that energy, and then at some point, as you said, thought, okay, now we have to be ourselves.
In the early days, we liked Devo, I think. Devo had a big impression on us. They did that version of Satisfaction on the first album.
Right.
I think. And that had a very unusual beat. And I think that probably influenced the beat on Nigel, probably, looking for it to play things on different drums, come away from the hi-hat, play it on the floor tom or something. And that had an impact. And I think also the Ramones, I think a lot of bands were influenced by the Ramones. And you had the Ramones earlier on in the 70s, before punk rock, they were a big influence. And the Talking Heads as well, Television, those sort of bands. But and then the melodic thing took over. Yeah, it was just a kind of a thing whereby you just wanted to drop the discordancy and be more melodic, I think. And I think the Ramones had a big influence on that.
Right. And then you'd also just added Dave Gregory. So you have a second guitar player who also has this very melodic sense of what he's doing. So you come in with the song Life Begins at the Hop. And how does that go from, you presenting it to the band to the finished version that we hear? Like, is the arrangement being done in the studio? Are you coming in and saying, no, this is how I hear the guitar riff, and, this is how I want you to play it?
No, that was Dave's guitar riff. What we used to do then is bring your acoustic guitar into the rehearsal hall and strum it to the others and sing it, So you had the chords, the melody, and the words, and you sang that to the other, and then the band would begin to kick it around. Oh, let's put a riff in there, So that's organic from the band, really. But that was the way we did it in those days. That's all you could do, really, is, being a bass player, that was more difficult because I had to put the bass down, go to the acoustic, and you strum it to the others, and then when people started to get the idea, then I would go on to the bass. That the way it was done in those days. So, yeah, it was a hotbed of ideas, our rehearsals, One would pick up something and then pass the baton on to somebody else, and they would take it further, and ideas were advanced in that way, So, yeah, it was a group effort, the arrangement, yeah.
The filmmaker Harold Ramis had said when I was interviewing him years ago that when you're making a movie, you're making three movies. There's the movie you think you're going to make, the movie you think you're making, and then the movie it turns out you made. And I'm wondering if that kind of applies to songs and albums as well, where you sort of envision what you think it's going to sound like, and then you sort of hear what is happening, as you're making it, and then you look back, for instance, now when all these reissues are coming out and going, oh, that's what that was.
Well, there's also the school where you haven't got any vision at all how it's going to turn out. You're relying on doing something in the studio where a kind of a magic happens, and that happened quite a bit, where you just had melodies, really. You had melodies and words, and you didn't really have much idea about kind of accompaniment and what was going to go with it, It was just an acoustic accompaniment at that time, and it could go a number of ways, but because we were guitar orientated, obviously the reliance was on the guitars and backing vocals and stuff, that was what was exciting. When you don't know which way it's going to go, in a way, there's a certain excitement about that, When the 4-track tape recorders came in and we were able to make demos, then, that puts the song going down one way, and that might not necessarily be the right way, So it's kind of nice when you give it to the band and see some life happen before your eyes,
Yeah, like something like Making Plans for Nigel, ends up with that sort of upside down drum beat going on, and that's certainly not something that was in the conception of the song. It's something you guys sort of discovered as you were making it, right?
Well, up to a point. In those days, I played a real cronky old nylon string guitar, and I used to play all downstrokes. And the thing is with downstrokes is that you can put emphasis on certain beats. Like if you're doing all downstrokes, not open strumming. And in a way, you can formulate what accents you want to be emphasized by virtue of these downstrokes, And I think from that, the beat for Nigel came about, And as I was speaking earlier about that Devo thing with Satisfaction, I think there was we wanted to create something that was different, had an unusual beat, and I think a lot of that came from that. And then we kicked it around and Bob's your uncle,
Do you think Andy had a similar progression where he's like, well, I need to sound more like myself too? Because obviously, to me, at least, Drums and Wires represents a pretty big leap over the first two records. And I'm sort of wondering how much was this you guys collectively thinking, okay, we need to, be more melodic and be more ourselves. And also, if there was any element of, you're coming in with these songs like Life Begins at the Hop and Making Plans for Nigel and 10 Feet Tall. And maybe, that has some response from Andy, like, oh, I need to sort of, raise my game too, because this is what's going on now.
I think definitely. I think after Drums and Wires, Andy became certainly more melodic with his songwriting, certainly stuff like Towers of London on Black Sea and those songs. I think Respectable Street, they're a lot more melodic than the first two records, I think. So I think that had an influence on him as well, his writing. So, yeah.
Was it a competitive thing in terms of trying to get the singles at that point? Because you were certainly writing the hits in that era, at least.
Yeah, I had a kind of a golden period where, things just clicked, I felt because Andy had been the writer, maybe they thought the wrong guy wrote the hit, I don't know. I certainly felt there was some sort of undercurrent from the others that perhaps, the wrong guy wrote it, But,
Hmm.
but you're going to get that competition. Yeah, sure. But, he had been the writer up to that point. And
I mean, was that a negative thing? Like, oh, the wrong guy wrote it, or was it a positive thing? Like, hey,
well, it wasn't expressed. It wasn't openly expressed, but I certainly felt the undercurrent of it, And I felt, we'd struggled for so long, and I thought, hey, we got a hit, and there wasn't the leap of joy that I hoped that there would have been. But that's bands for you.
In Chicago, the one that I remember getting a lot of it, the first one that I heard on the radio a lot was Generals and Majors. And I don't remember, it might have been just an age thing where I just wasn't as aware of listening to the right station when Nigel came out. But I remember Generals and Majors in particular being hit. I'm like, oh, what's that? Because that song seems to have about 20 different hooks that are just, going one after the other. And then at the end, you kind of cycle them all. But it's like this, it's almost like this textbook. Like if you wanted to like choose like the catchiest, most energetic, like power pop song, like not to use the power pop as a proper noun, but like that's kind of it.
Yeah, it was nail in the hook, especially at the end. It was kind of, well, we'll bring that back then. That's a good one. We'll do that for, I don't know, 4 or 8 bars, and then this will take over. And yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. In those days, we were told that we needed a hit. It was a big thing, and we were being on top of the pops, and that was what the record company expected of us. We had top 20 hits, and then they wanted more. They tasted blood, really. So yeah, that's what was drummed into us, really. We had to come up with the hit. The album wouldn't be a success unless you've got a hit single. That was the way it was. And then MTV came on the scene. You had to make videos as well, So that was the order of the day, really.
To me, Black Sea sounds like just a band firing on all cylinders. Like it just goes from beginning to end, just this sort of sweeps you through. There's just so much energy, and it's just, you guys are very tight and very powerful and very, again, like tons of hooks and everything. Did you have a feeling like, wow, we're sort of hitting a peak at this point?
Yeah, we had the same production team.
That was my next question.
Yeah. We had Steve Lillywhite and Hugh Padgham at the helm, and it became a good team. And we were working at the Townhouse, which is Virgin's own studio in London. And we had that big drum sound, the Phil Collins, do, all this kind of thing, It was a good team, and there was a feeling that we were refining our sound, I think, on Black Sea, Yeah.
How big of a difference did producers make in general? And yeah, you had Steve Lillywhite producing and Hugh Padgham engineering on Drums and Wires and Black Sea, and then just Hugh Padgham on English Settlement. But like, how much were the producers involved in sort of the sound and even the arrangements, maybe?
The sound, yes. Well, the sound, I think, was principally Hugh. Steve was a good people person, and he would try and eke out the best performance from you. That was his job, I think. And although he's down as producer, Andy had a good deal, definitely had a good deal to do with the production as well, probably on every album we've ever made, really.
Right.
That's just him, he's an ideas man. And so, yeah, in conjunction with the producer, it got done,
Yeah, that period's really interesting with that particular team because you had Drums and Wires, and then I think they did the third Peter Gabriel record, which is the Melty Face one where there are no cymbals on it, and I think Dave plays on that, and then Black Sea, and then somewhere in there the U2's Boy is maybe after that, but it's sort of, you could sort of listen to those as this kind of progression of ideas in a way. I'm wondering if you sort of like, if everyone sort of listened to everyone else's albums that Steve Lillywhite and Hugh Padgham were putting together and kind of, saw them sort of together in some way.
Well, it was that,
or learn things from each other at least.
Yeah, I think it was that big drum sound which became the Stone Room sound. The Studio 2 at the Townhouse became the sound that everybody wanted. It was on the Phil Collins record as well, which Hugh did. Yeah, just the big drum sound, We hadn't had it up till that time. We had drum booths, real kind of something left over from the 70s. Carpenter's records or something. Not that I'm criticizing Carpenter's records. I love them actually, but that dead drum sound. And there we had these huge Stone Room sound from the drums. So it seems to be on all those records. From that time. And Hugh had a great deal to do with that. And so consequently, after Black Sea, we went on to make English Settlement with Hugh, and plus Steve was busy, he was much in demand as a producer. So the teams kind of broke up through people clamoring after them, it was a good team and it lasted for a short while, but all good things come to an end, I suppose.
Yeah, well, English Settlement has this kind of depth of sound to it where you guys are layering more acoustic guitars. The percussion has different feels to it, whether it's on All of a Sudden or Runaways. Ball and Chain is still, classic, really catchy single. On English Settlement, do you guys feel like you were sort of expanding the palette?
It had more acoustic flavor on Settlement. It was still heavy in places, but the introduction of the acoustic guitars, they were starting to come in. And it was a bit of a sidestep, I suppose. And plus we had another hit, But yeah, we didn't do it at the Townhouse. We did it at the Manor, which was another studio that Virgin had in the country. And I think they had their own Stone Room by that time because that was the sound that most people wanted. So just Stone Room number 2, really. But with the addition of acoustic guitars as well. So it was a sidestep,
Do you guys have a conversation? Let's have the next one have more, acoustic guitars and maybe some world beats, or is that just something where you come in with the songs and then it just sort of organically goes in those directions?
No, I think it was a conscious effort to kind of expand the palette a bit. The guys had bought some Martin guitars and they were using them. And plus Dave had his 12-string Rickenbacker on that record as well. I'd bought a fretless bass. So, yeah, it was just a conscious effort to expand the palette, I think. Yeah.
It starts off with 2 of yours, Runaways and Ball and Chain. Is that like a negotiation when that happens, or is that a producer deciding, or does everyone think, oh no, these 2 songs would be a great way to kick it off and then go into Senses Working Overtime and boom, you've got a fantastic start to an album?
Probably starting with Senses wouldn't have been ideal because of the slow start. I don't know. Oh, just a general feeling, putting the feelers out with the band, and most people thought that, Runaways with that kind of ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling.
Well, and the way it fades in too is really dramatic. And then those drums come in, and again, it's like a slightly different drum sound, but it's pretty dramatic too.
I think it was just a general feeling, that arrived at that running order. I don't think we really there was any competition to actually start the record, as long as it started in a most exciting way, So I think it was just a general feeling, in amongst us.
Well, when I was catching up on your albums at that point, I had to chase down the British import because the U.S. edition of English Settlement took it from, 15 songs and 2 albums to 10 songs and 1 album. Did that piss you guys off?
Well, I think it had something to do with changing the cover as well. They wanted, they sent over this picture of a horse because they thought that the Uffington horse didn't look like a horse.
And you need a horse on the cover of English Settlement.
Goddamn rotten picture of a horse. So they sent over what they felt was a better horse, but that wasn't quite the point. The fact that it was a local landmark,
right,
etched into the chalk. So I think that raised a few eyebrows, but they skimped the album down. They didn't really want a double. I think there was little bit of animosity there, the fact that they'd skimped it down, you know, and what are they going to take out, you know? So, yeah, didn't go down well. We weren't too pleased about it, no, but I think they got reinstated later. So,
Oh, yeah.
All's well that ends well, put it that way.
Were you happy with English Settlement in general?
I think we were, yeah. I think because it had a number of styles on it. There was one of my songs in 5/4, and there was acoustic guitars. You know, there was the heavy guitar thing that we left over from Black Sea. You know, I think we thought that we were kind of expanding in different directions, and yeah, the palette was getting bigger. You know.
Famously, you guys were on tour, and I think you were in LA, and Andy was like, I can't do this anymore, and you guys had to cut short the tour. How big a blow was that to you guys artistically and also financially?
I had to take Andy home because obviously he was feeling very fragile, and promoters just wanted to cook him over a stove, you know. So I had to take him home, the poor chap, and we had to fly to New York, and we got snowed in for 4 days in New York. So we were in a hotel room. Awful. And artistically, it wasn't too bad. I mean, I just thought that that's what bands do. They have to tour, because I felt it was just a natural cycle, you know, to promote their records. I didn't even think that we could survive without touring, you know. But gradually I got conditioned to it, you know, and I began to like it, you know, and we got these 4-track little tape recorders on cassettes, and that you could do your own little demos on there, and that was quite interesting, you know. Yeah, I became conditioned to working in the studio, and I didn't really think about the live aspect, you know.
Had you enjoyed touring up to that point?
I wouldn't. My family was young at the time, so it was difficult, you know. Dad being away from home such a lot, you know, it was never ideal. I was kind of relieved when it came to an end, you know. The others, they were single and they wanted to be out on the road, but yeah, I kind of sided with Andy, really. I was okay with it coming to an end, you know. I had a young family, and I wanted to see them grow up, you know. So for me, it was all right. Certainly on a personal level. Artistically, it was kind of different. As I say, we had these 4-track tape recorders now that we could make those and stuff. So it was slightly different, but yeah, I didn't mind it.
Did you enjoy the onstage part of it, but just not like the touring part of it? Or really was all of it like something that was just sort of less, you'd rather be in the studio than on stage anyway?
Well, as I said, I just thought it was something that you had to do. So I tolerated it. I think if somebody said to me then, what would you prefer to do? Would you prefer to play live, or would you prefer in the studio? I think I would have chose the studio in any case, you know, aside from the personal impact, you know. With the studio, you're inventing, you know, and with playing live, not so much, you know. It's just they want the hits, you know, and so you have to play them night after night. But yeah, and the traveling and the personal side, as I say. But yeah, for me, it was the other side. The coin was better, I think.
Well, and the economics are, you know, the record companies, promoters always put sort of the bands at a disadvantage. But I didn't realize till I talked to Terry how much of a financial hit you guys took from the cancellation of that tour. Like Terry said that he worked like 18 years to try to pay off the debt from that. Did you have that kind of effect as well?
Well, Terry left soon after because touring was really it for him. You know, he loved tour and still tours today with his outfit. Yes, it was financially a disaster. And then soon after we had a court case with our ex-manager, which was even more of a disaster. So that took us, years and years to get out of the hole, really. And yeah, we have Todd Rundgren to thank to getting us out of a hole, a financial hole.
Right.
An artistic one. But yeah. So Terry left soon afterwards. He met his girlfriend, who later became his wife, in Australia, and they had a child. So he quit the band and moved to Australia, and I didn't really see him for 34 years. He came back once, I think, came to the studio at Chipping Norton, but yeah, he packed it in. And
was that a shock or surprise to all of you?
Well, he brought his girlfriend over to the UK, and they bought a house in the UK, but it was I think it was the wettest spring on record. You know, it was horrible, and I think she missed her native country, and I think they must have had words, and he wasn't feeling too well about the fact that we weren't touring, so the decision was easy, really. That he would leave the band and they would go back to Oz, you know, which they did. And I didn't see him for years, you know. He left with the cymbals still swinging, you know.
Did he sort of leave like I mean, I've seen, you know, accounts. I mean, I talked to him a little bit about this too, that it was sort of because you guys were working on Mummer, and it might have been Love on a Farm Boy's Wages, but there was some sense that like in the middle of the sessions, it was like, all right, see you at the clubs, or whatever George said.
Yeah. It was actually, he left during the rehearsal of Love on a Farm Boy's Wages, because it was like hand drums, you know. I mean, that wasn't Terry at all. He's a pretty meat and two veg kind of guy. You know. He likes the heavy stuff, and you know, we were doing acoustic stuff, and it was like hand drums and stuff like this, and it really wasn't him, you know. So I can understand why he wasn't truly into the material, you know. Yeah, it was during the rehearsing of Love on a Farm Boy's Wages. Wow. As a matter of fact, fellas, I don't want to do this anymore, so I'm out of here. So he got out. We were rehearsing at the Mechanics Institute in Swindon, and he just walked out the door, and I didn't see him for a long time after that.
Were you all shocked by that? Was there a sense of like, oh no, or was there a sense of, well, you know, we're going to open this up. This is an opportunity.
No, I think Jaws actually did hit the floor. You know, I think we were, oh, you know, it was a surprise. I think Andy rang him that night and tried to convince him that, you know, we'll work through this. But he was adamant. He said, no, the material's not really what I want to be doing. And so that was it. We continued as a three-piece, and for a long while after that, you know.
So I think Peter Phipps was the drummer on Mummer, at least for most of it. Did you guys bring him in? Was he brought in by the producer, who was Steve Nye on that? How did that work?
I think Pete Phipps actually, we remembered him from our touring days when he was in a band called Random Hold. He was drumming for Random Hold, and they supported us on one of the tours. And, you know, we thought, oh, you know, he's very good. He was in a Glitter band as well. And yeah, and what a lot of people don't know, he's got a very good jazz feel as well. Some of the songs were kind of jazz orientated, you know. And he could kind of turn his hand to anything, really. And so we thought, no, well, let's try him, you know. And it kind of worked, and he was a nice guy and fitted in. So I think we used him on 2 records.
He's on Big Express also, I think.
He's on Big Express as well, yeah.
Yeah. Like I Remember the Sun song from you on that. That's pretty jazzy. That's got like kind of jazzy drumming and jazzy chords happening on that.
I Remember the Sun, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, he did really well on that. And we did 1 or 2 other things that were kind of jazz orientated as well. And I thought, my God, yeah, this is sounding really good. And, you know, he's quite, what's the word? Kind of, he could turn his hand to anything. And yeah, so yeah, I particularly like what he did on I Remember the Sun too.
Yeah, and back on Mummer, I mean, Wonderland is again sort of a very different sounding song from what you guys had done before, like more keyboard oriented, more of sort of pastoral, just kind of again like different colors on that. Was that from the conception, or was that something you guys, again, when you sort of brought it in, you thought, oh, we're going to make this sort of more dreamy acoustic, dreamy sort of keyboard pastoral song.
Well, in the case of Wonderland, I think it was Terry that was drumming on that because we did that as a single before we did the album, and Terry hadn't left by then.
Mm.
So we did, I think it was Punch and Judy and Wonderland with Terry as a single session. I think it was with Alex Sadkin. We did that at Rack Studios in London, Mickey Mouse Studio. And that was a kind of an unusual approach to them because we had this kind of synthesizer kind of bass on that, you know.
Right. I like that song a lot. I mean, but it definitely is, again, sort of that evolution of the sound where you guys are, you know, exploring other things.
I think the fact that it was done as a single with Alex Sadkin, who's sadly no longer with us, was singles are kind of different because they're little time capsules with other people, you know, and they're not necessarily going to be like the album. We had that with This Is Pop on the first record. We did that with Mutt Lange. And they are kind of different because there's so much emphasis on them to become a hit, you know. They choose them as the singles. Yeah, this is going to be the single, so let's try and make it a hit, you know.
Right. Well, you got the two versions of This Is Pop. There's the one on White Music, and then there's the single version that's much more singly, like much more in your face.
My God, Mark, you have done your research, haven't you?
It's not even research. This is not. See, here's the thing with you guys. This is not research. This is like me having listened obsessively to it for decades. So when I got the singles collection and I was like, oh, this version of This Is Pop is different from the other one. And then I realized, well, that's the Mutt Lange version before he did Def Leppard. No, I have all the both versions of a lot of your stuff. I have the single with the electric version of 10 Feet Tall, which is different from the acoustic version of 10 Feet Tall that's on drums and wires. So I'm up on, I don't have to do much research for you, I have to tell you.
Singles are very often taken out of context from the album. That's what I was trying to get over with Alex Sadkin, you know, and Mutt Lange. Because there's so much emphasis on them becoming a hit, they becomes kind of different because of it, you know?
Right. I didn't realize that Wonderland was separate from the Mummer sessions. I guess I had not noticed that.
Yeah, that was done with Alex Sadkin. Oh, Phil Wainman. That was the guy who did Wait Till Your Boat Goes Down. That was another one of these he did the other version of 10 Feet Tall. So that's another, you know, you can see why they're different because they're, you know, so much kind of, let's make this a hit, you know. So yeah, yes, Wonderland was done by Alex Sadkin separately. And that was way before Terry left. So we had that in the wings before we even did Mummer, you know.
He's on Beating of Hearts too, I think.
Yes, he is. Yeah, those were the three. He was on Beating of Hearts and Punch and Judy, which I think was on the B-side or something.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, the emphasis, because they're done with a kind of a producer just for that, they do sound different to the album, although they're included on the album, but they do stick out as being kind of specially selected, you know.
Right. And then Deliver Us from the Elements is you starting to go down that psychedelic path a little bit, at least in terms of the arrangement.
Yeah, we had the Jewish harp on that one, I think. Jewish harp, yeah. Yeah, you got the heavy guitar from Dave on that one. Yeah, well, I suppose the Dukes were looming on the horizon, you know.
Right. So you have Mummer and Big Express, and then David Lord produced Big Express, which is not the warmest sounding record to me, but there's a lot going on in it. And, you know, again, sort of going back to that question of like, how much do the producers kind of impact what you guys are doing? I mean, I'd read that Steve Nye and Andy did not get along great. Like, how much did, you know, Steve Nye and, David Lord kind of affect the direction of those records?
Steve Nye was a house engineer at Air Studios and Abbey Road, I think. So he came up sort of under George Martin, I think. David Lord was kind of different because I think he was principal conductor for the, London Philharmonic Orchestra, I think, you know. He was a classical man, you know. What made us choose them, I don't know. Maybe they were cheap. No, don't. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how we arrived at these people, but they weren't hit albums. They were kind of a low point in our career. Big Express was more heavier, I think. the guitar thing started to come back.
Right.
The heavy guitar thing, even though there were one or two departures. I remember the Sun being one,
Right. Yeah, but the album starts with Wake Up, which is another one of yours, with those kind of cranky guitars going in either speaker. So that's a little bit of a throwback. But then by the end of the song, you've got this huge, like, sort of orchestra, like maybe this is what you were saying about his orchestral background. It gets very big at the end of it with sort of the choirs and the do and all that.
Well, that was David Lord, he wanted to, we say, oh, can we make this any bigger? I'm your man, fellas. David Lord took it to the Albert Hall and back, with those voices and stuff. But that was just up his street. It was his arrangement on that, My demo is pretty much the piano and the spiky guitars coming out of each speaker. One plays a triplet, the other plays a straight on, so you get that bam, 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 bam.
Right.
Andy says they sound like two fighting Jack Russells, Jack Russell being an English dog.
Right.
And then you had Alex Sadkin on the, they're brought in and they each add a flavor, to what's going on, That's producers for you. But they were producers, not in the old-fashioned sense. There's only been just one or two producers who have that thing where, say, somebody like a George Martin type figure, where they take total control, and they have the control. Certainly Mutt Lange was certainly one of those. And Todd, I think, is the other. The others, I don't think have the authority that those producers have, whereby they call the shots, and up to a point, I suppose Andy has been the producer up to a point, it has to be said.
Right.
In conjunction with the producer that's been anointed, with the producers that we use like Mutt Lange and Todd, I think Andy took a back seat, although he didn't want to. So I guess that brings us on to Todd or whatever.
Right. Hearing that Dukes of Stratosphear EP, it just sounded like you guys were sort of liberated in some way. It just sounded like it was so much fun, and there were so many things going on. Melodically, they're very catchy. That What in the World, your song that kicks off side 2 is like, better than It's All Too Much. It's like that sort of sound. After that was Skylarking. It just sort of felt like that sort of unlocked something for you guys, and I'm wondering if you sort of felt like that for you.
I think the record expresses the fun. I think if you listen to the record, it just gives off fun, All pressure was completely removed. We only had 5,000 quid, or was it 4,000? I can't quite remember now, but it was a pitiful amount of money to make it. So we had to go to, we got our old mate involved, John Leckie, and we sent him out to find a cheap studio, cheap but good, with good equipment. And John knows a lot of cheap studios, And I think we did it in Wales, the first project, in a little religious studio in Wales. The record company agreed to lend us the money to make it, and we were going to become the bands of the 60s and become psychedelic, using authentic guitars and authentic equipment, hopefully. And John Leckie has good psychedelic credentials, I think.
Sure.
He was involved with John Lennon solo albums. I think I think he was a tape op. So yeah, John was good for that and knew how to get the sound. So yeah, and we had some songs hanging about which could lend themselves to that kind of ethos, So yeah, it was good fun to do, and I think the fun comes across. It's not as intense, We're not trying too hard, and I think getting some of that back on the albums, on my XTC albums, would have been a great idea. But of course, there's pressure, but it's worth remembering, when there's not the pressure on you, that things can happen quite differently,
Vanishing Girl is the first song on Sonic Sunspot, which was the full Dukes album you did after Skylarking. To me, it's like the great lost Holly song. Like it's just this catchy, brilliant 60s bright pop song. And so I was thinking you must love that sort of thing, or, you know, and again, is that a song that you wrote for the Dukes as opposed to writing it for XTC?
Yeah, that was especially for the Dukes, that one, because the first one was out and out psychedelia. But I think on the second project, Sonic Sunspot, we wanted to expand the palette a bit and to do 60s pop as well as the psychedelic stuff, you know. So you had the Beach Boys with Pale and Precious, and Vanishing Girl was the Hollies song, you know. So we expanded it a bit, you know. Yeah, so that was pretty much. I'd had the melody kind of hanging about, but yeah, it became a Duke song because I made it so, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, something like Shiny Cage or 25 O'Clock. You can hear so many different songs kind of blended in there, but it's still its own song.
Yeah, exactly. Pale and Precious is definitely a Beach Boys cover, really.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. Well, we were experimenting about what we could put on, you know. We did a number of styles. There was that kind of Burt Bacharach thing of my song.
The Affiliated?
Affiliated, yes.
Yeah.
Of that, we thought, well, we could do a Brubeck kind of or Bacharach kind of thing in the middle, you know. It was any flavor from the 60s that we could nail in, really, you know. That was what made it fun, is that, you know, we could expand the palette quite a bit because there was, you know, the 60s were a great time for music. And, you know, so there was all those flavors that we grew up with. So why not put them in, you know?
Like My Love Explodes, just like it rocks as hard as anything from going back to Black Sea, I would say. It just sounds like you guys are just sort of cutting loose as a band.
Yeah, we just had a lot of fun and got the Hammond organ in. We borrowed Verdon Allen, who was the keyboard player in Mott the Hoople. I remember he got very irate when we took the back off of it. He took the back off of his Hammond organ. And we couldn't get the thing back on again. I think John Leckie wanted to mic up something in the back of the organ or something, and we took the back off. And I think Verdon got very irate when we couldn't get it back on, and he'd come to collect it, you know. But yeah, little story for you folks.
Were you in general as into, you know, sort of the psychedelic 60s music as Andy and Dave?
Probably not. I liked the melodic pop music of the 60s. I was a little kind of, I'm slightly younger than the other two, if I may say that. So I never got it as full blast as what they did, I think. But yeah, I knew the records they were referring to, you know, Strawberry Fields and stuff, you know, the Beatles' later stuff, and Pink Floyd, of course. But I didn't know Piper at the Gates of Dawn. I had to be reacquainted with that one. But I think that was what we were going for. So, yeah, I wasn't quite as knowledgeable as what they were, yeah.
Speaking of Pink Floyd, at what point did Dave Gilmour ask you to join Pink Floyd? Was it in that period or was it later or when?
I think it was around about 1989. Mr. Waters had left the band.
Right.
Up, and the other three wanted to go out on the road, and obviously the position of playing bass was vacant because Roger Waters had left. And so yeah, I think I was on a short list, and I had a call from Dave Gilmour and said, do you want to come down to the studio and have a jam, you know, with a view to going out on the road to promote their, was it Division Bell or something? I'm not quite sure. They were making a record at the time.
Momentary Lapse of Reason, maybe.
Oh, was it? It could have been, yes.
I don't know. That was like 87, I think, and Division Bell was a little later.
Yeah. Roger Waters had just left, so obviously, you know, they needed a bass player if they were going to tour. And we had a mutual friend, Tarquin Gotch, who was XTC's manager for a short time around that time. And he knew Dave Gilmour and the guys, and they wanted to know, would I be interested, you know. It would be singing and playing for a year, you know. And as much as I like the Floyd, I don't, by that time, I'd become very conditioned to working in the studio, and I really didn't want to go out on the road, especially for a year.
Right.
So I said, thanks very much, for thinking of me and stuff, but it's really not my bag, And so I talked myself out of it, really, and talked them out of it as well. So I turned down Pink Floyd. God, what an idiot.
That's all for episode 118 of Caropop. Thanks so much to Colin Moulding for shedding so much light on XTC and his tremendous work in that band. Part 2 next week picks up with XTC's work on what would become its U.S. breakthrough album, Skylarking, and it takes us through the triumph of Oranges and Lemons, subsequent financial challenges, the band's dissolution, and Moulding's return to recording and performing. Go to burningshed.com to order Moulding's CD single, The Hardest Battle, and a signed copy of the TC&I EP, Great Aspirations, which Moulding recorded with Terry Chambers. Burning Shed carries the latest XTC re-releases as well. Caropop is produced by Chris Swait, whose work day in, day out makes you feel 10 feet tall. We encourage you to support Caropop so we can keep this podcast free and sustainable. Please give whatever you'd like on caropop.com. We appreciate you. I'm Mark Caro. Please follow Caropop on Twitter, X, and Instagram at CaroPopcast. You can follow me as well at Mark Caro, at MarkCaro. Please share this episode, subscribe, tell your friends, and tune in again next week for part 2 of this Caropop conversation with Colin Moulding. Thanks.